writer, editor, translator, performer, and the list could go on and on and on for sure. A dear friend of mine who had this really brilliant idea a couple of years ago of translating Carla Lonzi's work, a really important book by Carla Lonzi, into English, and gave us all an incredible opportunity to actually read this book in English. We would like to have a very informal conversation today, a sort of a convivio, as Carla Lonzi probably would have said herself, in order to just give space to different voices, different perspectives, exchange ideas about this work. And for that reason, I also would like to mention for the audience who is following this conversation on the Facebook page of the gallery and on the YouTube page, I would like to invite everyone to address their questions to the speakers in the comment section of the Galleria Nazionale page, and hopefully we'll have some time to choose some of the questions and to address them to the speakers. I would now like to introduce my colleague, Francesca Palmieri, as I mentioned earlier, a curator and part also her of the temporary exhibition department at the Galleria Nazionale, who will together with me moderate today's conversation, and who will also tell us a couple of things about the archive and its connection with the projects of the Galleria Nazionale that are dedicated to Carla Lonzi.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks all of you for being here. I am truly honored to be here today with you wonderful people doing this very important presentation. So before we get into the conversation with our speakers, I would like just to give you some elements on the beginning of the relationship between the Galleria Nazionale and the Carla Lonzi Archive, a relationship that, as Anna was saying, was strongly encouraged by the director, Cristiana Collu. So the acquisition of the archive was completed in 2018 with the reception of the last part of the documents that were in possession of Battista Lena, Carla Lonzi's son. And ever since 2018, the Galleria Nazionale has started a twofold process. So on the one hand, a complex operation of inventorying, ordering, cataloging the documentary legacy. And on the other hand, the promotion and dissemination of such a rich and precious material. The first set of activities were actually aimed at understanding the composition of the archive that comprises a series of Lonzi's handwritten documents, including notes and diaries, photographs, published and unpublished texts, letters that document all type of relationship, and for such reason, not all of them are accessible because they involve people who are still alive today. Plus a wide personal library that was collected by both Carla and her sister Marta Lonzi, who was also a feminist activist. And the documents that are part of the archive span from Lonzi's adolescence until the end of her life. So building on this legacy and starting from this legacy that has been source of inspiration and research to many research artists, scholars, and researchers, the Galleria Nazionale has embraced a wide range of projects that are all linked by the vision, the idea that the archive is a living creature that inhabits our present time. So in 2018, the Galleria Nazionale promoted the festival, the 3-day festival Women Out of Joint, and the open call inspired by the work of Carla Lonzi, After Hegel, Who Are We Going to Spit On? And then again in 2020, the open call Shut Up or Rather Speak, again inspired by one of Carla Lonzi's work, that was an open call for videos that focused on self-portrait and video selfie, for which we received over 200 applications from 28 countries all over the world. This process of promotion had probably two peaks in 2021. So the first one is the exhibition Io Dico Io, I Say I, curated by Cecilia Canziani, Lara Conte, and Paola Ugolini, where, as Anna was saying before, an entire section was dedicated to the archive of Carla Lonzi, with particular attention to the material concerning the preparation and publication of Autoritratto. I don't know if we will have time or the occasion to dig into this aspect, but it was very interesting to see also how the images were chosen for this publication and the complex relationship that the images have with the text in this book. And the second peak again in 2021 was the complete digitalization of the archive, carried out in collaboration with Google Arts and Culture. So today on the Google platform, there are more than 1,600 items scanned and freely accessible online. And of course, we believe that this is a very important step to promote and encourage further research into Carla Lonzi's figure and into the interpretation and the modernization of her thought in our present. So I will now virtually give the floor to Annarosa Buttarelli, who is a philosopher and director of the Carla Lonzi Archive at the Galleria Nazionale, who could not join today, but wanted to be present with a short video contribution, where she will give you, well, she will give us some interesting notes on the relationship between the archive and Autoritratto, and then we will go on with our conversation. I hope that everything works.
Vedete qui un'intervista a Carla Lonzi del 1970 in cui Carla Lonzi risponde alle domande di Nicola Garrone che le chiede il percorso che l'ha portata ad Autoritratto. Carla Lonzi concepisce Autoritratto in una dimensione culturale molto particolare, che era quella attorno agli anni 70 in cui si inizia in Italia a concepire il nuovo femminismo. Autoritratto è un incontro che Carla Lonzi intende fare con i 13 artisti che sono presenti in questo libro, in modo da incrociare l'intuizione di un nuovo percorso che il femminismo farà nella vita singolare di uomini e di donne e la concezione dell'arte. L'idea di Carla Lonzi è quella di disfare l'idea dell'arte come qualcosa di accessibile solamente a chi appartiene a quel mondo, critici, artisti, collezionisti, gallerie, e invece far conoscere la possibilità del rapporto con l'arte come un rapporto umano, un rapporto che rende conto, diciamo, della soggettività incarnata di chi dell'arte si occupa in una forma, diciamo, quasi totale. La importanza di Autoritratto oggi è quello di un libro che segna una svolta irreversibile nella storia dell'arte e della critica d'arte, tant'è vero che oggi in molte università è studiato come un classico da cui non si può prescindere per comprendere l'innesto tra l'esigenza del femminismo pensante, quello di Carla Lonzi, di mettere in risalto le soggettività incarnate, le figure, diciamo, dell'esistenza personale, con tutto ciò che si fa politicamente e non nella vita collettiva e di relazione. Si può dire che con Autoritratto inizia il percorso dell'arte cosiddetta relazionale. Oggi se ne parla molto di arte relazionale, che è l'arte che vive dei rapporti, delle relazioni e dei contesti in cui nasce l'opera o anche il progetto dell'opera, cosa che non era assolutamente concepibile fino alla soglia di Autoritratto, in cui non si poteva parlare di arte relazionale perché l'arte veniva concepita come un fatto, un privilegio, si può dire, delle persone geniali, artisti maschi in particolare, che vivevano narcisisticamente la loro avventura di artisti adulati e baciati dalla sorte particolare. Con Carla Lonzi questo, dopo la concezione di Autoritratto, non potrà più esistere.
Well, thank you very much to Francesca for the introduction and for sharing the video by Annarosa Buttarelli, which I think is quite an interesting introduction to the archive. Before giving the floor to Allison, I just wanted to say one thing, won't occupy too much space, just to to introduce the conversation, just some thoughts that I had, because before this presentation, I was looking through different interviews and that came out with Allison, the text, different reviews about the talk about this new English version of the book. And I came across the interview, the conversation that you had with Teresa Kittler, which I thought was really interesting. And you talked about many different, very important, quite interesting aspects of Autoritratto, self-portrait. But at some point, you were talking about the whole sense of this operation that Carla Lonzi actually put together, right? And about the qualities of Carla Lonzi as an interviewer. So at some point, you actually ask yourself a question about whether Carla Lonzi as an interviewer is partial or impartial. And you, of course, say that she is partial and that the very act of making this book is partial. So actually, I thought that that was quite interesting, because in a way, it kind of puts at the center this tension that exists between, on the one hand, an absolutely collective quality of this artwork, as opposed to the individual creation of artwork as it is usually conceived, especially in our culture. But at the same time, that presence of her strong voice, the operation that she puts together of actually like dismantling and reassembling completely the different pieces of conversations in order to put together a narrative that is actually a very precise and clear narrative that is only hers. I think that is something that creates, quite an interesting contrast. And I would like, at some point, if we could talk about this this combination, like the opposition between the multiple perspectives and at the same time, this very clear voice that becomes, very evident through this operation of assemblage that she actually puts together. That said, I would like to give the floor to Allison Grimaldi Donahue, and together with her also to Carla Lonzi, since Allison is also going to read us an excerpt from the book.
Thank you so much, Anna and Francesca. Thank you to the Galleria and to Cristiana Collu especially, and to Battista Lena, without whom this project wouldn't exist, and especially to my publishers, Eleanor and Camilla at Divided, who believed in this project from day one and were enthusiastic to do this book in English. And thank you to Cecilia and Caterina for being here and for your work about Carla Lonzi. I wanted to share a brief excerpt because I really think it's important that we let Carla Lonzi speak for herself in English whenever we can. And it was really interesting listening to Annarosa Buttarelli's video, because it really hit on a lot of points that I've been thinking about lately. Because I think this book can be read front to back, but it can also be opened and you just find wisdom sort of where it is on the page. And there's a section towards the beginning on page 74, it begins, and I wanted to just read 3 pages of Carla Lonzi speaking to some issues about what being a critic is and what being an artist is today that I find extremely relevant 50 years after the original publication. Lonzi. One can be close to artists today by listening to them and listening again to them if you don't understand them at first. But how can you make a gesture like this afterwards, which is a gesture of the critic's absolute impotence? Because if you take a recorder, it means that as a critic, you no longer exist in the traditional sense. How can you then make the old gesture again? This yes, this other no, you can't do it. The first time that I used the recorder, I said, but what's happening? I didn't really understand. I felt strange with this device. It isn't something that's so obvious. And then I said, well, it's logical that I felt this way. That is, I want to be close to artists and to free myself as a person who may have this academic culture, because the funny thing is that the critic learns what the artist is while at university. He learns about historical context and then his own conception of the artist, of the critic, and of culture, and then he never questions them ever again, with the recorder or otherwise. I like these works of yours because when I'm there inside them, I feel like any other person without all that stuff that a person gets from culture of protection and privilege, the protection, the privilege, which is useful if I go, say, to a museum. But there, I don't know how to describe it. I'm just like a person who goes into a church because I don't know. He's got a problem that his culture cannot resolve with nothing, without, and very suspicious of that which someone, on the other hand, has in terms of daily feelings. Actually, the specialization of feelings. After these things, everything plays out on a different level. I get to thinking about it when I take action, or when I'm distant from action. If I confront this feeling that has stayed with me, what if, with a life situation that I see as false, and I think about that which was true, I don't know, that which flows out of the honest behavior of a person, you know, it becomes something that you carry with you then in other moments. I think that when one is a critic, one should also examine oneself, have experiences, take in everything about this sector of activity, namely, have a kind of initiation, a word that came to me and I'll hold on to it. Because initiation means that you enter into a thing, get into this thing, absorb it, you transform and live meanwhile, right? It's not that your whole life, you got to stay passionate about something artists are doing or staying in of itself in a particular place. It's interesting to you in a free way in a certain period. It won't interest you at all in another period, and then it will. Now, there was a person who said to me, but you in America, did you go to the Young Artist Studios? I said to myself, how strange. I went to zoos, I went to museums of natural history. I saw what I could about the American Indians. I saw the architecture of H.H. Richardson and of Sullivan, and also their contemporaries. I'll show you the slides of the warehouses in Minneapolis. I saw friends, I saw the bourgeoisie, or what the Americans call the middle class. I didn't intend to see artists. It didn't cross my mind to visit studios. I believe that over the years in which I have attentively and carefully dedicated myself to this, now I no longer have this anxiety, because let's say one wants to have the experience of what art is, then the fact of informing oneself little by little about what's happening is another thing. Understand what I mean? It's a professional necessity not to miss a word of what's going on, but spontaneously, one feels carried in different directions. So with those carrying in different directions, which I really love, this idea that art brings you other places, and it clearly brought Carla Lonzi many other places. I'd like to pass the word on to Cecilia Canziani. Thank you for being here, Cecilia.
Thank you, Allison, and everyone for the invitation. I'm really, really glad to be in such a company. And I guess this is, again, Carla Lonzi's fate, that she brings together what belongs together and creates again another resonances. I'm very touched and moved by this translation, Allison, and I kind of like really, really difficult to talk after such a passage. I think that hits the core of what Autoritratto is and why we're reading it today again. I do think that is an incredible endeavor, and I think it calls for a poet to translate Lonzi, and Cantor calls for an artist to translate Lonzi, because she was a hybrid figure in herself, and again I think that there's something about it that calls us again towards her book. And I also think that it calls for an incredible publisher to bet on such a publication today. I'm also quite amazed. I was really looking forward to your translation, because there's been so much talking also beyond Italy and in the English-speaking world about Carla Lonzi and her work, that without having access firsthand to the very speech of her, everything kind of like always felt abstract. And it's interesting that your book falls into a combination of things that are happening. There's Luisa Corna and Jamila Muscat and Matthew Hyland that are also translating both the art criticism texts and feminist texts. Last year, Francesco Ventrella and Giovanna Zapperi published this amazing reading, Feminism in Art and Post-War Italy, The Legacy of Carla Lonzi, and your translation. So I think that it's such a beautiful, bouquet of points of view as well, and things that emerge here. the first thing that I read when I picked your book was actually looking at some words that to me really are part of the fabric that Autoritratto is. These are direct speech. This is my son destroying the wall. Beauty. Yeah, well, talking of houses. The direct speech, so how you would sort out this colloquial, direct translation of a conversation that Carla Lonzi dares to put on paper, and the haha and all the sounds that appear, and they were really. It was like in that time, it was really rare to find such a language in an art criticism, specifically book. I looked for gracious, graziosità, grazioso, which is another word that I love about Lonzi. She uses it. And I must compliment you beyond that, because there's really the kind of rhythm, the kind of voice that Lonzi has, because she's always very clear, in my opinion. She's always very crystalline about what she has to say. There's sentences like that passage that you read, and you read it, and it's like it's so perfect. And at the same time, she's perfect. She's also very complex, and I think that the register you use in English is able to really bring those two elements about. The other thing that I was reading, that immediately I looked for, was the photographs, how they were represented, because that's a very big and very important part actually of the book. So we said the book is the montage of recordings that are assembled in a different way, and as you say, appropriated by Lonzi, who, from her own point of view, remounts this conversation. Then there's photographs, and the photographs that make part of the book, I don't know if someone else said that before. And there's a very beautiful essay actually of Teresa Kittler in The Reader, curated by Zapperi and Ventrella, about the appearance of the domestic spaces through the book that Autoritratto is. There's a number of photographs that, if you look at them together, and in the exhibition, Io Dico Io, the part that was curated actually by Francesca and Anna, would bring that really clearly in your eyes, that there's not one, almost, there's a very few images of works of the artist. There's the spaces, their houses, their families, their holidays, that thing that Carla Lonzi addresses in the book. So why the direct speech? And why the spaces? In the introduction, she actually goes back to, or she somehow summarizes the passage that you read when she said that this book emerges from the collection and rearrangement of discussions with some artists. That's already a selection. It's not every artist, it's some. Which ones? The conversations, they don't originate as material for a book. And that's another important aspect. They respond less to the need to understand them, to the need to spend time with someone in a fully communicative and humanly satisfying way. And that's another, how to say, it's beautiful, no? It's about why we spend time with each other, why we're happy even now to see at each other, to meet again, to discuss about things. It's not about being the professional circle, it's about the pleasure that listening to one another brings. And then she said that felt like a possibility of meeting, an invitation to participate, addressed by the artist to each of us. And then she used the same word that you used just a second ago. It seemed to be a gesture to which I could not respond in a professional manner. And that's another thing that strikes me, because there's the sound, so the speech, there's the spaces where you meet, and then there's the gestures. So there's the body that is very present in the book. This is a transcription, no? And every time every time that we transcribe, we are bringing a sound, we're bringing someone else's voice inside our body and then gesturing and therefore interpreting, which to me is so much like what you do when you translate, is listening. So you listen to Lonzi, you wrote over again, you wrote it, you let the words resonate with you. And in a way, I think that you also offer a self-portrait of yourself, because what is that book ultimately? Why are we so always attracted by it? I just read also a little excerpt of Queen Latimer writing about it. I have to say, it didn't surprise me that she also was conducted, like driven to your translation, because I think we're still trying to think with Lonzi, before Lonzi, think about Anna Banti, think about Woolf, Virginia Woolf, and many others. And after Lonzi, we're still thinking, how can we write beyond the canon, beyond what we've been taught at universities, beyond the kind of vertical, ideological, cultural, Lonzi would say, way of thinking through art and making art criticism. And a hybrid path is very often what, as women and as a feminist, we always come across. And most part of that is about reperforming speech, reperforming words, and reperforming artists. Let them speak on themselves. And that I always see a correspondence also between Banti's Artemisia and Lonzi's Autoritratto. There's the emergence of the voice of the artist herself and himself. And so in that way, it doesn't matter really that Autoritratto is, there's just one woman, there's only Carla Cardi. But the feminist aspect is in the way in which it's written, is conceived, is thought as part of life, weaved within a life and the spaces of life. So how much have you enjoyed translating Lonzi's Autoritratto, Allison?
I enjoyed it most of the time. There were translating is hard. I think, you know, it's like it's wrestling. I find it was really a pleasure, and then there would be moments when I would not know what was going on in the text, and I would ask friends to help me with it. And I think that's something very important to recognize, that, you know, like all books, this was an extremely collaborative project, and I was often reassured by my Italian friends who speak Italian as their first language that no, this is different. This doesn't make sense, or this, you know, you're struggling with the language because it's clear the person speaking is also struggling with their ideas, and so you work through the ideas together with them. I think, and that's exciting. But yeah, translating is a wrangling. It's a violent process that you try and make peace with, I think. So, but it was a pleasure. Yeah, and it's a pleasure now to see it. And I think I was thinking as you were speaking, Cecilia, of the fact that I think we translate things, at least I translate things to bring them closer to my understanding. And so I think as I was translating, it would be like a revelation to truly understand something that I had read in Italian, but then to synthesize it for myself in English and to really absorb it in a different way and let it become part of me too. So.
Shall we leave it to Caterina to continue?
Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you all, and thank you to La Galleria Nazionale and especially Allison for the invitation. I come to you, I guess, as a reader of Lonzi more than an expert in any way, and I guess I'm also kind of slotted in the category of art critic as one of the definitions of what I do. So I guess maybe allow me some kind of autofiction in the way I'm gonna say what I'm going to say. First of all, I want to congratulate Allison on such an amazing accomplishment and yeah, kind of adventure, I guess. And drawing from my autobiography, I was lucky enough to live and spend time in countries away from Italy. And it often came a time when I was talking to fellow artists or curators, and we were dealing with Italian thought, and we were maybe approaching feminism and feminist thought in Italy. And I was really struggling in trying to explain Lonzi with my language. And I'm so happy we now have, you know, this gift to share and to use, to study, to research, and to build bridges, you know, with people that, want to approach this. So I think this is amazing. And also, I want to confess to a failure, because I met online very much in a situation like this with Allison a year or so ago, when we were in deep hardcore lockdown, and she was telling me about this this journey she was on with Lonzi, and I was super excited. And I guess she had a sense that, you know, I knew English a bit, although Italian is my mother tongue. So she was generous enough, although we didn't really knew each other that well, or we have never kind of met in the flesh up to that point, to share with me like the draft of the translation. And I felt that was a really generous gesture, but also kind of, I guess I failed because I didn't live up to the task. Also, I felt quite crushed by it, to be honest, you know, because I think to do it properly, you need time and care, and I couldn't offer those. But here I am. And I think I'm kind of at the other end of, that gift, as I was telling it. And I was preparing for this and, you know, reading the book, and also reading what you've written, Allison, in the translator note. And I love the bit where you write, allow English to perform Italian voices. And I could really see myself, you know, in exhibitions, in museums, in bars, speaking, you know, in English, but with animated hands, not even knowing I'm doing it. And then there's like photos of me like all over the place with this movement. And also, I was really excited by the translation. And I think it's weird, you know, for someone that approached the Lonzi's writing in Italian to find again this kind of vitality in English. And I also think there are like brilliant moments of translation, like just a silly example, when you use that expression, that signor so-and-so, which to me like falls into, you know, it's basically out of Italo Calvino character in one of his novellas. So I think, it's a great, great contribution. And going back to this idea of art critic is something I kind of struggle quite a bit myself in, you know, using this definition. I guess I came to terms with being a curator, being trained as a curator, because I feel more a balance is an imbalance, but, you know, a mix of theory and practice in the work I do daily. But I still have not really come to terms with the idea of art critic, because I feel is a definition that is still quite embedded in a normative structure or a romanticized idea of someone that judges, that speaks for rather than speaks with. And of course, this is like the canon that Lonzi is turning upside down and shaking. And also I'm kind of, you know, reading your translation and thinking a lot about also the idea of institutions, you know, and what we do in the work we do and in the roles we inhabit. So I'm currently directing a museum, a Museo di Arte Contemporanea di Termoli. And those are all, you know, quite resonant thoughts. and also being, I guess, a female curator and performing the care job, and I just open an exhibition and feeling really kind of emotionally drained and exhausted, and also thinking a bit back and the way I approach writing or interviewing artists, and trying to second guess myself always in this tendency of being their voice, or transcribing what they tell me, the way they see things, and really imposing on myself to, keep going back to a different lens or opening it up. So I think all those things are very much embedded in what you've done, and a lesson we all thank you for and share with you. And yeah, and maybe we can carry on more as a conversation. So thank you so much.
I would leave some space to Allison if she wants maybe to, have some comments.
Thank you, Caterina, for all of your comments. And yeah, we met in a funny situation online, but I knew that this conversation would return, I think, because of that first interaction we had also, which was really meaningful in our conversations about Lonzi. I was struck, I was writing things down as both of you were speaking, and I think I'm quite intrigued by this idea of the care job of the curator, because I think it's also very similar to that of the translator, or even of the critic in some cases, depending on the circumstance. And the different levels that can take up, and the emotional labor involved in anything here. And I think one of the beautiful things that Carla Lonzi does in this book is reveal some of that emotional labor, which is what was also said in the video, is that all of those things suddenly come into the scene as having to do with the work of art. And when Cecilia was talking about the photographs, I was thinking, it's true, most of the photographs are not of the works themselves, or they're not professional style photographs, but they're snapshots. And they're snapshots of people having human relationships and families. And suddenly the artist is a person among many people having interactions and learning things. And I think a lot of this text has to do with what it is to be an artist, or in Lonzi's case, which is an extremely hybrid figure, I consider her an artist, that it's not necessarily related to a product, but it's related to a choice of way of living, and the way that she chooses to have relationships with other people, and the work that she does. And it just continues. Like this book is one step in a much longer process. So I'm happy a lot of those ideas have come up. Yeah, I'm really interested in hearing more, I think, about Carla Lonzi as a hybrid figure, maybe if anyone wants to talk about that, and also the idea of care in the art world, and what Carla Lonzi brings to that through Autoritratto and through her other work as well.
I would like to ask you, Allison, if you can, because I understand it has been a long process, but I wonder how many times you yourself change your mind about Lonzi. I'm sure, translating her, you encounter so many different aspects of her personality. Are you still searching for her, or you think you figured out some of her? How's that going for you?
I would never say I figured her out. I mean, that's, I wish she were here with us. I wish she could be part of this conversation. That would be the only way to know her. She's left us a lot because she was a prolific writer throughout her life, in all sorts of forms, which is so exciting. I don't think there's one Carla Lonzi to know, and I think that's the exciting thing. And maybe that's also an aspect of this text, is that she is speaking to us also through the other voices. It's revealing her intertextual, intersectional self. But if you look at her writing from when she's young and writing poetry, all the way through to her work with Rivolta Femminile, with her conversation in Vai Pure with Pietro Consagra, we see someone who's evolving and changing. And so, she died very young at age 51, right? So who she would be later in life, we won't know. We won't know how her ideas would have developed. I think with a figure like Lonzi, who is really, especially perhaps because she died so young, She takes on legendary mythological proportions in many ways. And I think we have to be very careful to take her, listen to what she's telling us, and take from that what we can. But I think there are many selves within her writing, and to allow each of those things to speak slowly, because of course a translation is translating, I believe, is a form of criticism, right? It's an interpretation of a text. And so perhaps in, I don't know, 20 years, someone else will translate this text and have a completely different reading than I have had, with different ideas and different perspectives. So this book now, especially in English, exists in time, and the Italian text as well exists in time. And so we read Lonzi from 2022, so we have to really let her try and speak. I hope that answers some part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the many things she does in the book that I really admire is the silences of Cy Twombly, you know, which speak louder than words. And it's also interesting, her, I guess, questions are often before a silence of Cy Twombly. So in a way, almost, you know, giving into a form of thought that remains without answer, but still creates a thought, makes space for a thought in the word, I guess. Yeah.
But it's also the part that it's unanswered also because it was the only written interview, right? And yeah, I also like it that she incorporated the silence, and she also incorporated this completely different tone that she has in the writing. It's this graziosità accademica, no? And it's a form, to me, it's a form of making irony on oneself, or, you know, like kind of like self-criticizing, saying, okay, this is a way to do that I don't want to do that anymore. And that's the way in which you are a critic that remains unheard, and the answer is mute, because you it's like, it's such an articulated, such a close questions in time, no? That doesn't allow for a real intimate answer to emerge, because it's the sense of intimacy, I think, that is really striking here. Even there's passages that are exciting, there's passages that are frankly at times boring, there's passages that are complicated to read from the point of view of today. And I think that we always have to remember that was not written today. and yeah, also because it's important not to make her Santino, but to let her way of writing alive. Allison, you were saying, what is about the caring, the curating, and with Lonzi? And I think it's in the act of listening and making space, or what Caterina was saying as well, like being in a conversation, letting things emerge, which is something that what she kept from Autoritratto on is actually this act of recording, so in a way creating a document of the then, of a specific moment, but then listening back, then transcribing. It's in the diary, Taci anzi parla, it's in Vai pure, the dialogue with Consagra. So that becomes a sort of like structural way for her to write, this idea of translating and then reperforming through this transcription, which is really, it's mechanical. We have to remember it's about either writing with a pen or with the old typing machines. There's something really about being a sort of like something where sound becomes a sign again. It's very, very, very fascinating to me.
Yeah, at a certain point she says that, right? She says that she wants it to become something like a musical score is the word she uses. So yes, it becomes something like that.
Yeah, and then there's the other suggestion that will emerge later, because really Autoritratto is not the end, but it's really the starting of many other things that will evolve over and over. And it's you choose a different cover, and that's another question that I wanted to make. And a very, like, it's a cover that is basically illustrating everything you're saying now about that, and it's probably very much about, like, I can see very much you in that close listening and and writing. The original cover was showing Teresa Vartel, who's one of the mystics that has been mostly fascinating for her. And in the, not in the forward, how do you say it? Closing, the postfazione. By
the afterword.
She points out that the fact that she was very keen on having that photograph because for her, Autoritratto was similar to these diaries of the mystics of Teresa di Lisieux and Teresa di Avila, which were written as a sort of like task given from their chief of the monastery, but that at the same time, while making space for a withdrawal, they also show them. They also leave the very essence of her. And in fact, in this book, Lonzi very often disappears in between the words of the others. But when she's present, she says things that are really going to the very core, no, of her profession or her being. She uses very interesting words as well. So like, and you translate it very well. So I'm gonna just quote from you. No, I'm to be on propensione al bene. So there's something about already in this very first book, something that already anticipates a very last books on the mystic and on the preziose, last reflection on the mystic and the preziose, which is pretty interesting. Basta. Disposizione al bene, yeah. Consciousness of art and the willingness to do good. Isn't an odd sentence for an art critic, no?
Well, because she talks about the fact, right, that she, in the beginning of this text, she talks about how she was first drawn to religion, because she was searching for something, and then she finds it in art. And so I think that's really incredible. And then the art brings her back to something that I think is quite spiritual, this interrelationships and the focus on humanity. But the cover, the original cover from De Donato from 1969 is actually the Fontana piece. And then it was
because they refused this one, which was reprinted by et al.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was refused because they found it too sweet because of the face of the monk.
Yeah.
of the
So I'm happy that that edition actually gave the cover that she wanted. This cover, which was designed by Allison Katz, the artist Allison Katz, which I really do love this. We wanted the color is actually a kind of a recollection of Rivolta Femminile Green, the publishing house that Carla ran in Milan with Carla Cardi, Carla Lonzi, and Elvira Bonotti. But we wanted to have Carla Lonzi on the cover. It seemed like the right thing to do, to introduce her in her position. That seems exactly what she's doing, right? She's listening to the tapes. And the image is actually sort of a mashup, much like the tapes themselves. So there's sort of this discord happening as well, right? There's the stopping and there's the starting. But whenever I think of Carla Lonzi, I think of her sitting at the table transcribing, hunched over. And when we were thinking about, was the translation a pleasure to do? It is, but I think it's very similar to transcription at times, that it's physically arduous, that you're sitting there working on something, concentrating and at a desk for many, many hours. And I think there's all these, it opens up the conversations around the table, and the table separating her from the work, but also bringing her to the work. And so I think that was part of the idea that we wanted to make sure was present, that she was the center of this text, and that people knew exactly what it was. It signaled that it was a recorded document. There's so many places to go from the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually going to just come back for a second to a couple of things that both Allison and Cecilia brought up that I thought was very interesting. This idea that Cecilia brought up that Carla Lonzi cannot become a sort of a Santino. So like this idea, kind of an essentialist, kind of universal knowledge that, sometimes is definitely part of certain conversations around Carla Lonzi is not really the right way to go about it. And Allison was talking about how we need to take from that what we can. So like to actually take the pieces that could be useful for us and then creating our own kind of assemblage and putting it together with other things with which initially it doesn't belong, but like create meanings and narratives in that way. So I actually wanted to share an experience because it kind of happened this way that while, you know, before this presentation, while rereading Allison's translation, I was also at the same time reading the book that just came out by Ilenia Kaleo that is called Performance Materia Affetti. And actually in that book, Ilenia talks a lot about Carla Lonzi, and mostly in the reading of Giovanna Zapperi. So she talks a lot about Autoritratto and about many different like really crucial points that then are still extremely crucial in some of the questions that are posed by trans feminism, by, you know, queer feminism, by especially you know, two main issues that I kind of thought was interesting to reintroduce, even though we kind of partially talked about it already, like the idea of processuality, both of art and of art criticism. You know, the whole form takes this place. She talks a lot about how it's important to create this convivial situation, the situation of communication, spending time together, the collective dimension of art, and the process that kind of substitutes the final product, which is the artwork. And then another thing, of course, that is at the core, at the center of the whole project is the whole, you know, kind of a conversation around whether it's even possible to imagine a coexistence of a feminist project and of an artistic project. So I just thought it was very interesting that in the works that are very, you know, contemporary, they still right now, and of course that can be, you know, kind of obvious, but some of the points that Carla Lonzi introduced, not even in Autoritratto, but really through it, with it, because it's in the form, as Cecilia was saying, more than it is in you know, what she actually says. It's like the form that she creates. It's still extremely relevant and actually becomes a really interesting point from which we can go into so many different directions. Like, so actually, if we try not to put Carla Lonzi in her little, you know, cage of like a very precise context and open her up to some different ideas and also the ideas of different feminisms, I think it also becomes quite an interesting conversation. So I don't know if any of you wanted to, you know, comment on that. I thought it was an interesting point.
Well, I really want to read that book now. Thank you for mentioning that. And I think there's, I guess, two things. One is that I was drawn to this book originally because my background is in literature, right? Like, not in art history. And I'd heard of Carla Lonzi, but I didn't know that much about her. But I was drawn to this book originally as a work of experimental literature, which I consider it to be. And I think we need to remember that it is a hybrid text as well. It doesn't really fit into any particular genre. It's difficult to categorize. And it's a mashup. I mean, now I teach creative writing and we talk about uncreative writing. We talk about pastiche and collage and things like that. But Carla Lonzi was doing this already, and plenty of others were. I think that was also part of the 70s and the 60s and the 70s in experimental writing was a lot about stealing and borrowing and intertextuality, and also tapes, like thinking about experimental music and tape music of John Cage and Pauline Oliveros. But I really like to think about Carla Lonzi and contextualizing her also in terms of a literary figure in Italy, who I, to my knowledge, and I've asked plenty of people and done a lot of research on this, there's no one else like her. There had no one before her and no one after her working in the way that she was working. For me, often I think of her in a context of the avant-garde of the 1960s in her own right. So she was working with artists, but she was just as experimental, if not more so, than many of the people that she's speaking with. So that's something that I'm always thinking about. And then I really would love to hear from Caterina and Cecilia about if they think that there can be feminist art today. And like, what do you consider that to be maybe? Or what is a feminist practice today? Or what is feminist criticism today? Because Caterina, you were talking about, this is a question for both of you, because I always ask myself, like, what legacy has Carla Lonzi left you as a curator and writer? And do you feel that in your work on a regular basis?
Wow, what a difficult question. I mean, I bring her with me, you know, I'm maybe not consciously, but I've learned also as I've kind of grown to move away from a heroic position of having everything under control, to expressing more the anxiety or the really hard processes behind things. And I think this is something, you know, she led the way on. And that's not a position of weakness. I perceive it as a different kind of, I guess, care or graziosità that, you know, can teach us something about how we can be in relationships, meaningful relationships with other people. I don't know how to define it, though. I think it's more like an attitude, or something you live through and you learn every day, and maybe you make mistakes, and then you carry on and change your mind about things. I found really interesting also when you were talking and Cecilia was mentioning this idea of the Santino, because I also went through waves. Facebook reminded me that 11 years ago, I used as my Facebook image a Carla Lonzi picture. And I was like, this is so weird. I didn't even remember this. And I'm like, this is such a, you know, kind of teenager way of, looking up at someone, but not really knowing so much about her, you know, and maybe, perceiving her as an icon more than really. So I guess I'm 11 years later, maybe I'm more feeling her than using her as a Facebook picture. And I think, I don't know, I was thinking a lot today, you know, reading passages from the translation. My mind was racing in different directions, and I think, you know, I was thinking of bell hooks or Monica Vitti, and this idea of feminism that it doesn't prescribe to a structure. It's just more a way of being themselves and being a different person, and also, you know, going from maybe an antagonistic mode to a peaceful one without a sense of continuity, but being true to oneself, to the situation and the relationship at hand. So I guess something like that.
Shall I? I was thinking, because I mentioned before Queen Latimer, and when I was writing a piece from Manuela Pacella, whom we both know well, who created this amazing collection of articles together with Flash Art. And Queen defines her writing, feminist writing, and at the beginning I was like trying to get across it, trying to figure it out. And after I read her, the last book that she published, Just Like a Woman, I thought that it was in the way in which she was dismantling speech, dismantling text, putting that together, combining the essay form, combining the art criticism, combining the immediate surroundings, that resonance, that spaces have, and more than ever, again, I say, because we are so much in our houses, that brings us together too. I think it's that attitude that makes space for hybridity again. That's something in which I recognize a legacy of Lonzi, which is still alive, and something that I would really define in that realm. Thinking about other writings, I don't know if you have come across Grazia Livi, who's another obsession that I've had together with Anna Banti. And she also, in a book that is called Le lettere del mio nome, which is a sort of like, it's a self-portrait. It's a book that she publishes in 1993, but she's been a feminist militant, a writer, And in that book, there's both Anna Banti as a character and Carla Lonzi. So the two of them are both present and resonate, I think, with their own writing. It's an incredible book with a preface. It has been republished recently with a preface by Liliana Rampello, and brings together a chronology that is continually broken by her decades, like, young woman, mature, older, her readings, because what she claims is that the women whose books I've read are part of my conversation, a part of my life. And so in that, Allison, I think that you would find something close to the things, the aspect that I think interests you in Lonzi. More problematic, but interesting as well. So I see that there's like a sort of like, it's very similar to the way in which with Lara Conte and Paolo Golini we were working for Io Dico Io. Rather than writing linear stories, looking at those rivers that bring different figures together, that create a constellation. A constellation is a beautiful idea of, a map that appears in the dark. So, but then when it's dark, it really shines and you can see it very well and precisely the connection. But yeah, I think that's the kind of writing, curating perhaps, that I would retrace to a similar interpretation of what feminism can be.
I really liked what you were saying about the constellations, because I think Carla Lonzi brings so many people together. Like what we were saying before, like she talks about it and we live it. It's always an occasion for meeting humanity, but it's like across the world. And I think it's quite incredible that there's so many constellations and people interested in her work for whatever reason. We continue to be drawn to her. I'm fascinated by this. I think a lot of it, probably has to do with also a rebellious, radical move that she made, right? To renounce the art world and step away and do something else, do something that was more meaningful to her. We still want that, it seems. We're still troubled by the world we have so much. It's almost as if, I feel this at least, it's almost as if I wish I could muster the courage that Carla Lonzi had in many ways to make such a radical move. And we're all united through her. So I find that to be very exciting and comforting.
I would like to ask a couple of questions to Allison. Since you said before that you were drawn to Carla Lonzi from a literary background rather than from an artistic, from an art historian point of view, so I was reading the afterwards by Claire Fontaine in your translation, and at some point they say that in this book you find Lonzi and her personal quest. So her writing is complete. It's impossible to separate from her life, her experience. And I was wondering how much of this personal quest applies also to your experience in translating, and how this translation is what is the position of this translation in your broader practice as a performer, as a poet, as a writer, so in your practice as an artist. And then also I had another curiosity, since you said that some of the things that Carla Lonzi points out or complains about the functioning of the art system 50 years ago are still very, very real today. So if you have some comments of something that strike you, that was interesting for you, that you consider particularly interesting today?
That's a tough question. I'll start with the first part of that question about the context. I think as a translator, I think I have a very difficult time translating things that I don't love. I'm not, and I think, which is a good thing and a bad thing maybe for me, in that I really only am interested in translating works that I fully believe need more readers. I think so few works are translated into English each year. If you look at the statistics, it remains somewhere around 3% of everything published in the English-speaking world is a translation, which is very little compared to Italy, which is something like 30%, maybe or 40. My statistics aren't exactly up to date, but it's much higher. It's inverted, right? And a lot of those things come from English, and there's a lot of colonial dynamics to translation. And so what I'm trying to say is that I think it matters what we translate, and that it takes so much effort and so much money and so much energy and so much willpower to produce a work and a work in translation, that it's almost like it's an artwork unto itself to produce a translation, because it involves so many different processes and so many different collaborations. And so there's that aspect of it. So I'll say that about the things that I translate. I always love translating things that I really believe in, because it takes so much effort and involvement from so many bodies and entities. And I think also when I translate something, it really becomes part of me. There's this essay by David Rattray where he translated Artaud in the 1970s. He was the first English language translator of Antonin Artaud from French. And he talks about how it's a risky occupation, how there's always the risk that you go too far, that you become one with the author. And I definitely feel that. I think translating self-portrait and studying Carla Lonzi further, I think Agnes Varda talked about how could you be a happy feminist, right? You're full of anger. And Carla Lonzi was certainly very angry as well. And I also, in translating some of these things, felt very angry, because I read them and they resonate with me, and they were written over 50 years ago and they still seem true. And there's also things that I read and I'm extremely happy about, of course, and I think, wow, she was brilliant and was able to see this thing ahead of her time. But for me, the aspect of translation is really integral to everything I do. I think reading and writing are the same thing, and they bleed into each other constantly, and translation is sort of the embodiment and most explicit demonstration of that. And I also think as a writer, someone who uses text all the time in different contexts, Carla Cardi in this book says, you have to name the names of the people you work with. You have to name the names of the people who have given you those ideas. And I think that's something that needs to be said over and over again in our culture, where we pass things off as being genius and brilliant, but they're really collaborative efforts that come from lines of thinking and generations and many, many voices. And so I think translation or in intertextual writing and just saying where things come from and sharing is like a happy, progressive, productive mode of stealing almost. But the anger issue, I think, is what gets to me about the functioning of the art system. And I don't want to get too deep into that, because I think systems are often broken and complicated, and there's so many reasons. Carla Lonzi has an essay where she talks about why women should exclude themselves from all celebrations of male art, basically. And I think it depends on the context in which you live, what resonates with you about what she's saying about art systems and what doesn't. But I think what she's calling for is a world in which we value relationships over profits, where we value honesty, perhaps, over markets. And I don't think we're in that world, and I think she was hoping for it. So there's something very angry and difficult about the writing, but there is also something extremely optimistic in the hope that there is something better out there that we can create together. And so I think if we listen to what she's saying and take it truly to heart, and I think many people do, I don't think everything has remained the same. And I think people in the 70s were probably also taking it to heart and living this life. But she's making a call for action, and she does it herself. And so it's our necessity to try and follow her. And I think when I first started studying Carla Lonzi, it was very difficult for me to accept the fact that she had left the art world. It seemed like a choice. I was like, but I couldn't understand it, right? I couldn't grasp it in a certain sense, because things have changed enough for me to feel like there is space for all kinds of people across the gender spectrum to have a place in the art world. We might have to fight for it, and there's still tons of things to be done, but it's possible. I think it's much more possible today than it was in 1969. And so I'm very grateful for that too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I would say that with this really positive and optimistic note, we could actually end this conversation. I must say that it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to just spend time with all of you and to have this conversation around this incredible project that, you know, definitely is gonna have a huge impact from many different points of view. And we started with Cecilia being touched. Now I'm kind of touched and moved by everything that has been said. And I don't know, I would just say that what the hope could be that someone one day is going to transcribe the conversation that we just had. Thank you so much to everyone for participating, for being with us here today. And I don't know if Francesca maybe has any other comments.
No, it's been a real pleasure. I think it's yeah, it was great having this conversation with you all.
Thank you for having us, truly.
Thank you.
Grazie, thank you.